So in light of the recent shooting at the grade school in Connecticut, I thought I would make my own Philosia video regarding some of my thoughts about America's love affair with firearms. And in order to understand where my perspective is coming from, you should know that although today I live up in Alberta, Canada, I've only been here about a third of my life. I was actually born and raised in the US and spent 2/3 of my life there, and was even in the US military in signals intelligence and worked active missions. So although I'm talking as somebody who is separated from the US now, I'm still a US citizen, and I'm familiar with being in the culture of the US, and I'm familiar with being in other cultures, including the culture of Canada and North American Indian cultures, specifically Blackfoot culture. So I've got some perspective to speak from, I think. And when you look at this stuff that's going on, that people every year, there's people in the US who are just kind of like snapping, who are having psychotic episodes and going into public places and shooting them up, and it's a suicide run basically. When you look at this happening, this is a cultural thing, and I think in that film Bullet for Columbine, Michael Moore did a really good job at demonstrating just how cultural it is, and how subtle that little thing is that's going on in America, because in terms of all of the media stuff that's feeding into the culture, yeah, there's a lot of violence in the media. There's a lot of violence on TV. There's a lot of violence in the movies. There's a lot of violence in music. There's a lot of violence in the sports. America's a violence-loving country, but in all of those, like the sports, music, TV, movies, and such, for the most part, those are, the stuff that's coming out of the real solid industries is being marketed worldwide, and worldwide people are buying into that stuff, buying into that violence, and yet worldwide you don't see these massive shooting incidents occurring very often, not as often as the U.S. In fact, the death by firearm in the U.S. is like thousands of times higher on average than it is in countries that are very similar to the U.S., like Canada, for instance, Britain. So what's going on? When I was growing up, the 2/3 of my life that I did spend in the U.S., I was exposed to a lot of, what I would consider a lot of people going haywire with firearms. I grew up with guns. I had a rifle growing up, and it was commonplace for me and my friends to grab our rifles and just go outside, wander around out, the forests and fields, and shooting at targets, and sometimes shoot animals and stuff. That was just part of the culture of the U.S., is growing up with guns in your hand. And that's, it's kind of similar up here in Canada, not quite to that extent. But if you live in the country, a lot of kids do grow up, with 22s and that kind of thing with hunting. But it's different. It's different. And, you know, I was exposed to people doing crazy stuff in the U.S. I'll give you some examples. My daughter's best friend, her brother, you know, who I knew as the kid who would drive my daughter and her friend around all the time, he went to college, and while he was in college, he went and, you know, had something happen where he snapped, and he brought a pistol downtown in Portland, Oregon, and went on a shooting spree, killed some people, and then got himself killed too. One of my friends that growing up with, well, not really a close friend or anything, but a kid that I went to school with, I knew pretty well. He just lived around the block, but I didn't like this kid. But anyway, his dad took a shotgun, walked in the backyard, and blew his head off. Blew his own head off. Suicide by shotgun. One of my own uncles took an assault rifle and held my aunt and his kids hostage in their house, threatening to kill them all. And it was like playing live on the news and stuff, and cops had to go and surround the place, and he was pretty lucky that they didn't kill him. I think they were able to talk him down and arrest him. He was pretty lucky, because that was a bad situation. Another kid that grew up around the block from me snapped, shot his parents, and started their house on fire and burned the house down with him and his parents in it. And, you know, it's just all these incidents. You know, I had kids threaten me with guns growing up. And I had, you know, it was not unusual to even see, you know, grown men and stuff carrying guns around like they're getting ready to go to war or something. And like one of the areas where I used to hike around and stuff as a kid, these you know, like militia type guys go out there and use that area as they had like a little firing range that they built. They'd have all kinds of assault rifles and stuff down there. They'd be shooting up the place, dressed to like G.I. Joe and stuff. And you know, so I grew up in that culture, and I didn't really think anything of it until I was in the military. I was a very patriotic American. I went into the military. I was in signals intelligence, and I was aiming to go into special forces because I wanted to help free the oppressed. And what I learned very quickly in signals intelligence is that Americans are actually the oppressors out there in the global world. We're not carrying freedom to anywhere. What we're carrying is a lot of death, colonization, and theft of other people's natural resources. We do anything to get at whatever resources are hot in the market at the time, especially oil. And when I was in signals intelligence, we were in the first Gulf War, Desert Storm. I wasn't involved in that. I was working live missions, spying on the Soviet Union at the time the Soviet Union was crumbling. But certainly the Desert War stuff had a big impact on me. because I was learning about what was going on over there from the guys that were going over there, from guys that were involved in live missions and intelligence over there and such. And it was like, to me, it was so obviously a bullying thing where these Iraqi elite Iraqi soldiers were coming out and like kissing the boots of the Americans coming in because they're so scared that they're gonna get killed. It was just embarrassing that we push our weight around like that. And in terms of intelligence, I saw it time and time again in different stories where what you'd see in the mainstream media is nothing like what was actually going on. A lot of times, stories would be twisted to make it look like the U.S. had to do something to somebody, but in fact, we're just being bullies and killing people in our bullying. There was this picture I had of this little Kurdish girl, and it just looked so pitiful to me, and I felt so bad, like looking into her eyes, I felt so bad that what we were doing over there, was throwing her life into shambles that I don't think, she or anybody else who witnessed to that kind of violence will ever recover fully from that. And I fired all kinds of weapons in the military, all kinds. And I saw what those weapons could do. I saw what they could do to inanimate objects, and I saw what they can do to human beings. And it's not pretty. And with all of the stuff going on with the war stuff, and with my learning that we were in fact the global bullies, with what I saw, the kind of destruction that firearms have, I became very disillusioned with my identity as an American, and I sought to get out of the military. And once I did, I looked for some other identity. That's when I started looking into my black heritage, and that's when I moved to Canada. So, and along with that was the matter of the guns. I haven't owned a gun since leaving the military, and I don't know if I'm ever going to own a gun again. At this point, I just really don't like them because of the destruction that they do. And even if I go into a movie nowadays, if the special effects crew has done their job right, and that movie is very realistic, and it has firearms and bombs and stuff going off, I can smell the gunpowder and smell the ozone, and if the sound is just right, it'll make me flinch. And that's how affected I've become by what I've seen with what firearms can do. They're not pretty at all, and I just don't really want any part of them. There's this other side of me, though. There's this other little side of me that wants to maybe buy a couple of guns and a bunch of ammunition to keep at the house, to put away. Because what I worry about is when shit hits the fan in North America, which is bound to do someday, and maybe in my lifetime, but there's wars that break out in countries all the time, and there's no reason to expect that we're going to be exempt from that, especially with the environmental shifts that are going on, the climate shifts, and the way that that's going to affect populations and movements of people. we're bound to have some bad times ahead here. And I think when that shit hits the fan here, the police, the National Guard, the militias, and these types of, military-style organizations that are currently supported by the government, these people are going to be our enemies. They are going to lock us down, and they're going to abuse our families. They're going to threaten us. They might kill us if we don't participate just the way they want us to and whatever they want us to participate in. And so, in that scenario, I think people are going to want to have guns, and you can already see that this is what's going to happen, because these groups already abuse the citizenry. You saw it in the Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, when stuff got chaotic there because the government really didn't care about those people. It's going to just, herd them all into this stadium and let them die in their filth. Then, eventually people broke and things went nuts. Chaos, and the cops become the bad guys. The cops become these, street thugs that are armed to the teeth. And that's some scary shit. You see it in the protests that went on last year. In the Occupy protests. A bunch of people that are, a lot of them are educated people, and they're just trying to, raise some awareness about the incredible economic inequities that are occurring in our society and the environmental issues that coincide with it. And just because they're out there and they won't leave public space, you saw several police organizations go fucking bonkers on them and use basically, everything that they have in their arsenal that they can use that's not going to kill people, but that is going to create some serious injuries all the same. And you saw them abusing kids. You saw that cop at Berkeley just abusing these kids. The CS gas. I've had that CS gas. I've been in the gas chamber in it. It's like you're dying. So, in my estimation, these cops are not our friends. These cops are, they're our friends when it's convenient. But the minute we're not going along with what the government wants, those cops become basically a domestic army that's against the citizens. So, in that situation, I've considered arming myself, just putting it away, putting it all away, get some guns, get some ammo, putting it all away for the in case of. But beyond that, I really don't want to have anything to do with guns. I don't even know if I'm going to ever do that. Up here in Canada, it's not easy to get a gun. You have to go through training. When I first moved here, actually, I did try to buy a rifle for hunting. And what I was told was I needed a firearms requisition license. And in order to get the firearm requisition license, I have to go through a firearms safety training, hunting safety. And, I told them, well, shit, I've been using guns my whole life, and I just got out of the military. And they said, it doesn't matter if you are firearms instructor for police, you still need a requisition license in order to buy a firearm. And even at that, you're not going to get any, you're not going to have this concealed weapon stuff and these assault rifle things that go on in the U.S. It just doesn't, it's just not, here in Canada, it's just not like that. In fact, our laws around weapons in general in Canada are very strong against any kind of arming yourself in a way that makes it obvious that you're preparing to deal with human beings. And this affects martial arts practice too, because there's a lot of martial arts weapons that you're not allowed to own in Canada. You're not allowed to own nunchucks in Canada. You're not allowed to own a whole variety of different kinds of blades in Canada. You're not allowed to own throwing stars in Canada. Shuriken. There's all kinds of martial arts, traditional martial arts weapons you can't own here because they only have one purpose, and that is armed combat against another human being. And if that's your purpose, then in Canada, you're not allowed to have it, right? So anything that's like that doesn't have a function other than combat against another human being, then it's out of the question. It's just not allowed here. It's illegal. It's a crime. So I don't know if I'll ever acquire firearms here, but that's my personal feelings about it. Now, what is my view about why you see this thing going on in the U.S.? And to me, what I see is that it's acts of desperation for people that have given up completely and they are at the stage of suicide who are doing this stuff. It's not anybody who thinks they're going to just have a shootout and get away with it. It's people that are ready to throw away their lives and they're going to take out as many people as they can with them. This is suicide happens around the world, but it's very, very cultural the way that it occurs. And so it fits into, holistically into the rest of culture. Somehow it's rational in the US, given the rest of the culture, that this is how suicide is carried out there by a lot of people. Not everybody in the US goes on suicide shooting sprees when they're going to kill themselves. But a whole lot of people, if they're going to kill themselves, will use guns to do it. And then every year there's, so many of these, like school shooting kind of a thing. And so it's a suicide. It's a suicide pattern. And so in order to understand what's going on, we're going to have to do some, should involve the experts that are studying suicide patterns cross-culturally and trying to figure out what is it about U.S. culture that brings about this particular suicide pattern. Because this is not the suicide pattern that goes on everywhere else. Here in Canada, when people want to kill themselves, and it happens here, suicide, like I said, suicide is like everywhere. In fact, when I was spying on Russia, or Soviet Union, that was about the big thing that would happen, even though the Soviet Union was falling apart at the time. We were supposed to report to NSA about certain things, and one of the things we were supposed to report on if we saw it happening was suicide. And that was probably the thing that reported to NSA the most, was that there was all kinds of suicide going on over there. And suicide certainly happens up here. Since I've lived here in Canada, I've seen, not witnessed with my own eyes, but I've known people who have killed themselves. And how it's done here is by hanging. People will hang themselves, usually hang themselves in the basement of the family home, and their family will come and find them. That's what happens. But in the U.S., it's by gun. So I am not an expert on suicide, and so I can't really tell you. I haven't done the study to know in any kind of informed way why it is that people are using this particular pattern for suicide in the States. But I do have degrees in cultural anthropology, including a master's degree in cultural anthropology, so I am very familiar with doing cultural analysis. And one of the things that I think might be a part of it, and it's going to not be just one thing that causes this suicide pattern. It's going to be a whole collage. It's the whole culture that feeds into any one part of it. It's not just one cause. And so yeah, the media and stuff, that's going to play a part, but it's going to be more than that. One of the other aspects I think that plays a part of it is that, like I was saying, the organizations that are reputed and given license as authorities for the United States, like the military, like the government, like the police, these organizations, how do they deal with problems in the U.S.? They deal with problems violently. When they have serious problems, they deal with it violently. That could be some leader in another country doesn't want to give the access to American oil companies to drill on their lands, so the federal government will send the military and blow them up, and they kill all kinds of people. I mean, it's like going on a shooting spree. That's what, if you're at the ground level, a grunt going into one of these countries is being assaulted by us, going on a shooting spree. The bombing raids that open up any campaign is like a shooting spree. Lots and lots of people get killed. They should never be killed. In fact, nobody needs to be killed, because it's all just for oil. Things like that. Gold. Stuff like that. And this has been a long time thing. I mean, ever since the foundation of America, this is the way that the government has operated. And the first ones that they, wanted something from was the First Nations and Native Americans. And, what I learned when I was in training in military intelligence was that even a lot of the techniques and strategies used today were founded in the wars between the settlers and First Nations. And they've just worked on honing and perfecting those techniques ever since. And they're still being used in wars today, just at a new level. So this is what the government has always done. And if the government's going to model this, what do you think the citizens are going to do? It's the same thing with the police. How many times a year do we see police brutalize some unarmed, peaceful citizen? And this happens, and this is not just one bad cop or something like that. Sometimes there's a whole group of cops. Sometimes there's a whole police force that, they're under orders, and they're gonna, clear people by whatever means necessary. And so they go out and they do it. And if the people are going to resist them at all, they'll beat them down. And they've got the bigger weapons, right? They've got all kinds of armor. They've got guns. They're a bunch of bullies. And their gun is their bully license. It's my bully license. I got my gun. So the cops do this. The cops do this. So, you know, what do you think that citizens are going to do if they see that the authority figures all use firearms to bully people? You know, why should the use be different for citizens? You know, but on the one hand, you know, this isn't really bullying that we're talking about. It's suicide. It's suicide. But like I said, with the military, it runs the risk of suicide as well. They just sacrifice the 18 to 21-year-olds. So, you know, I don't know. Like, I can't say, because I haven't really studied suicide in depth to understand why this is the pattern in the United States. Obviously, it's not the only way of suicide in the United States, but a lot of people do take themselves out by gun, and a lot of people do. Enough people go on shooting spree that, you know, that I knew someone that did, and not just one person. I knew another guy who came pretty close. My uncle came pretty close to going on a shooting spree. Even a guy in the army, two guys, in fact. There's one in basic training where we were all bunched up in a room. We had our rifles, we had bayonets affixed to our rifles, and this kid was getting claustrophobic, and he was just starting to snap. And he was going to shoot and stab everybody. There was another occasion where, you know, at the barracks in Fort Polk, Louisiana, this sergeant just kind of lost it. He was walking around in his underwear with a rifle. He was going to shoot people. Something that went on with his wife. And this is suicide behavior. You know, it's not that these people think that they're gonna just get away with it. They are committing suicide, and the way that they're doing it, you know, suicide is always sad. It's always a terrible thing. And so if that's the method that they choose, if they choose the shooting rampage as their method of suicide, they're going to try to make it as sad as possible. And so, you know, it's not surprising to me that now, like, people are grown-ups are walking into a grade school and unloading on little kids in America. That is not surprising to me, because this is where the pattern was going. And I don't think this is going to be a wake-up call for people. I don't think much is going to be done about it. You know, I saw online the other day, I saw a little bit that got me to really thinking. And what it said was, you know, one failed attempt at a shoe bomb, and everybody has to take their shoes off going through security at the airport. But you have all of these shooting sprees that have gone on. So many deaths by firearms in the United States every year. Thousands. And gun control is not being taken seriously yet. So nobody intends to do anything about it. In fact, you know, we just heard the other day that it might be that in Chicago, people are going to be allowed to have concealed weapons now, concealed firearms. You know, so it's not getting, the gun control is not getting stronger. It's getting more relaxed. So, you know, all these different parts to the complex. There's the fact that weapons that are intended to be used against people are not being controlled in the U.S. There's the fact that the government, the authorities in the U.S., the authoritative bodies use firearms in desperation to bully people to do things their way in their affairs, both foreign and domestic. And there's the fact that in all kinds of media, there's that violence, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. It's getting worse. You know, it may be something like what was happening, you know, toward the fall of Rome, when they started, you know, when things were getting so desperate economically that they started entertaining people with gladiator sports, and maybe something like that, where, you know, the violence is taking people's mind off the pain of the economic desperation. I don't know. But on the other hand, you know, your average U.S. citizen person is far from in economic despair compared to third world conditions and that kind of a thing. So, I don't know, I don't have the answers, but I wanted to give my thoughts on it, and I wanted to make it very clear that I see what's going on as a suicide pattern, and that in order to understand this and do anything about it, it's going to have to be approached like that this is a suicide pattern that is deeply cultural, and that it's going to take anthropologists and psychologists working together to sort out what needs to happen. But what needs to happen, I can tell you right now, is that culture has to change at every level, because it's connected holistically to the suicide pattern. So the culture of America has to change dramatically in order to change the suicide pattern, and it's very difficult to consciously fashion that kind of cultural change. You can't orchestrate it. Cultural change just happens on its own. It doesn't happen because somebody's forcing it. So what can be done? I don't know. I don't want to leave it like you know, like it's a desperate situation that nothing can be done about. But on the other hand, I'm really not optimistic that much can be done about it, because of how deeply cultural it is, and because it's not just a matter of controlling guns, it's a matter of controlling what people do, what path people choose for themselves when or if they decide they're going to take their own life. And that's pretty tough to, you know, try to control any kind of legislation, anything like that. So those are my thoughts.